submitted an e-sports paper, please check your school email for important information. That's
Always first.
members that filled out this paperwork.
I'm glad you're always first. Ready for it? All right. My eyes were killing me. Julia, you got one turn in, and as your classmates trickle in, you can make sure they all know. Staple the pages together. Original packet, plus Monroe. Staple together. Come on in, come on in. Thank you, dear.
He was trying to speed up him until he locked his bag.
Actually brought a black shirt, just a black sleeve shirt.
A week later, my arms in the sleep. I'm just super lean, pickle king, y'all.
Hey, baby, get out the camera like that. You need to go sit down. That's what you need to do.
I know me and I like
You want a camera shot?
Turn it in yesterday's.
Okay.
Turn it in. You're turning in the presidents we've had for several days now. Go ahead and staple Monroe to the backside. It's right here. Turn it in right now.
everybody like ready to get out of here.
Yeah, to self-defense.
I can start taking out game from here. Like, you don't say nothing about it.
Lucky.
Oh, there we go.
Your name Lucky? Lucky.
I'm sorry.
You gotta turn in that I need. It's on the chair in front of you. Don't this one. Yes, staple Monroe. Read the instructions. Staple the Monroe notes to the other. Stapler is provided.
That's not mine.
Who did it?
I do. I just thought.
Also, serious. Hold on. You can't read my handwriting.
Turn it in, that's all you gotta do right now, no other opener, just turn it in right there, keep it neat and tidy for me.
Let me find out.
Are you
Oh, these are really good.
and you got children.
Get out of the way.
Oh,
I got one of those too.
Right, no, right there. Right where you at.
are you matching smart? I don't even what?
He probably out there changing like he always.
Oh. Oh, good.
Wait, what? I'm telling you.
No, y'all were.
Just put the four immigrants.
No.
I don't even need no. Are you all just coming in late? Should be on
Somebody
I ain't got a hair bow. So you got a hair bow? My hair right there. I hair bow, girl. Wait. I hair bow. I did.
I'm like a coke right now. I'm like one of the right now.
Because it was after.
You see a snapper for last week? No, play football.
Three.
I know.
You got my paper.
Isn't that your paper?
Oh, man, you got my paper. Well,
Then I'm cooking.
Everybody, get your bags, get your stuff, get out of my room. You have 1 minute. 1 minute. Get your bag, get your stuff. Get out of my room. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Get your stuff. Get your stuff. Take it all with you. Take it all with you. Get out of my room. 10, 9, put your hand on the rope. Put your hand on the rope. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hand on the rope. Hand on the rope. I said, everybody put a hand on the rope. Now walk. Walk. Wait. Go. 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 Oh, God, I thought you said my name. Psych! I ain't doing this, man, bro. Bro, my shoes stay on time.
It's fast, that was nothing.
Look at it.
All right, y'all sit down, but don't touch anything. Oscar, why you
Put it straight down.
Yeah, you can put the stand down.
Ain't no way, kid. Why not put it out?
All right, so as you're sitting here and you're wondering, why you just got up and walked around the school and held a string and all that kind of stuff for like 10 minutes, and you're like, why are we in this room now? What's all this about? Why are we doing this? So questions, okay. In first block, it was a little more wild because, got like 20-something people in there, and, they're all complaining, I don't want to walk, and I'm tired, and all this. So what about you guys? How you feel right now?
I feel good.
You guys could keep going?
Yeah.
Like, for like 5,000 miles?
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be easy.
I can walk all day.
You guys wouldn't get hungry?
Nah. I get hungry, I ain't gonna lie. I get thirsty.
What if it's hot outside?
I get thirsty. Yeah, I get thirsty.
Or then what if it ends up being the winter time when it gets really cold?
I'm gonna have me hoodie. What?
Yeah.
I always wear it.
Anyways, y'all need to be focused up here.
I'm trying to, okay?
So this whole thing that we just done is you guys got relocated. You went from one room to another, and you were like forced to do so. You didn't have a choice. You were just told to grab your stuff and get out and go. So what this was is it's going to simulate
On Cherokee.
the Indian Removal Act of 1830, brought upon by President Andrew Jackson. And so what the Indian Removal Act is and what it leads to is this famous, where's that? Okay. This famous thing right here called the Trail of Tears. So that's what you guys just got to experience. And if Addison doesn't put that phone up, he's going to get to experience something else. Now, the Trail of Tears. This is where all of these Indians, they had to leave their lands. And not willingly, but they were forced. Because you had, so we're going to talk about here in Georgia. Okay, you had 5 tribes. They were pretty civilized. They were, now back then, they referred to everyone that was not an Indian as the white man. And so these Indians had adopted a lot of the white man tendencies. Government, culture, they were intermarried with whites. They were even having slavery in their lands. And what happens in Georgia is they're going to find gold. And then when someone finds gold, they're going to say, man, those are good lands and we want those. So the federal government and everyone's going to try to get these Indian lands. And they're like, well, there's one problem. There's people living there, those Indians. And they did not care about the Indians' rights in their lands. So they're like, we're just going to take the Indians and we're going to put them somewhere else. We're going to relocate them. And so the Indians are going to travel on this Trail of Tears, which ends up going from, most of them would end up in Oklahoma, well, what is present-day Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma did not actually become a state until 1907. And why would we relocate from Georgia out to Oklahoma? Well, that was just like the Midwest. That was just this big stretch of land. And back then, people never thought the United States was going to expand that far. So they thought we were just sending the Indians to some like barren, plain wasteland out in the middle of nowhere. And it wouldn't matter. But then eventually Oklahoma, we all know, becomes a actual U.S. state. Now, along this Trail of Tears, what do you guys think it was like? Okay.
Sad.
It's sad. And you think they had, were they well taken care of? No, not at all. Because what's going to happen is about 100,000 Indians are going to get relocated and go on this Trail of Tears. And out of those 100,000, you're going to have about 1/4 of them die along the way. Because food was very scarce, okay? They weren't feeding these Indians a whole lot of stuff to take care of them. If they died, then oh well, okay? And you've got to think about, they had to walk the whole way. And they had soldiers there every single step, okay? Holding them at gunpoint, making sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do. And so they're being forced to move, relocate, go somewhere else. And so you're going to have 1/4 of your Indians die. And what's going to happen is your white man is going to take over their lands. And their lands were very agricultural. They had good soil. They'd grown crops very well. And we wanted those lands. And so we took over their farms and their plantations and all of those things after making them leave. And at first, we made it sound like it was a good deal. Like, hey, we'll pay y'all, this is the government, hey, we'll pay y'all this amount of money and we'll give you guys this land out in the Midwest, and that's cool. And what happens is these Indian tribes, not the whole tribe, not even the leaders of the tribes agreed to this deal. What happened is there was a group of these Indians in the tribes, and they got talked into signing this treaty. And so they signed over all their rights and all their lands. And then one day the government shows up, they're like, hey, you got to go. It's time to leave. And the leaders and everyone else of the tribes, and they're like, what are you talking about? We didn't do anything. They're like, well, we have it right here in signature that these people from your tribe signed off on this. And they're like, well, we didn't sign off. It didn't matter. We got some signatures, and so you're gone. You got to go. And a lot of the people that died along the way were either your elderly people or your really young people. Okay? Your elderly people aren't going to make it because what did they look like walking all the way halfway across the United States? Walking and having to go through the weather conditions and everything else that's brought upon. And then young people, like babies and infants and things like that, how are they going to pull this off? They're not. So by the time all your Indians get out to Oklahoma, they had lost most of their old and young people. And these are just pictures. Gotta go back. So President Andrew Jackson, okay, this right here is part of what I was talking about. A group of your Cherokees here are gonna sign this treaty that gives their land to the government. Here you go. And then this would kind of be like what this represents. So a small group of these Indians made this deal, and they weren't even leaders. This would be like a small group of your classmates, the 10th grade class, say like 5 of them, making some decision where all of you guys had to go and dig ditches and shovel roadkill for the next 3 years. That would be like them agreeing to that, and you guys having no idea and having to randomly somebody showing up one day and forcing you to go do that, saying that you signed on to do this. In fact, you didn't, but somebody signed you up for it you didn't know about it. And so these Indians had to leave, and this gets into Worcester versus Georgia. This is a whole ordeal where the Supreme Court's going to strike down and say it is not constitutional to make these Indians give up their lands. And Andrew Jackson and the state of Georgia, they're basically going to act like the ruling never happened. They're going to sort of undermine it, overthrow it, and say, we don't know what you're talking about. There is no ruling. And your chief Supreme Court justice at the time, John Marshall, who's, the big guy in charge and all that, well, Andrew Jackson says, if John Marshall wants to enforce it, let him go enforce it. But I'm not. And so nothing comes of this good for the Indians, and so they're forced to relocate. Now, you had several different groups, though. You had your Cherokee, your Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. Okay, these are your civilized groups. Now, back then, you would hear people refer to Indians as natives and savages, and that these Indians were doing all these things and stealing all this stuff and killing people and animals. And actually, no, that's not true. Actually, the white man attacked more people, stole more, killed more, done all of the above than the Indians were doing. The white man attacked the Indians more than the Indians attacked the white man. And so Andrew Jackson finds out about this gold because if you end up mining this gold, you can sell it and make what? Money. And there was approximately 300 ounces of gold being found per day. And so that's going to add up to making a pretty decent amount of money during this time period. Now, at the bottom, adopting the white man's ways, you got Christianity, central governments, written constitutions, they spoke English, all this stuff. So they weren't some just wild, tribe and all that. They were civilized people, but they were forced to leave their home. Okay? Imagine you guys being at your home and then somebody showing up and saying, hey, you got to get out. You got to go. And you don't know where you're going. They're going to tell you where to go. That's sort of how it was. The government shows up to the Indian territory and they're like, hey, you can hang out, but you can't hang out here. So they had to go. And this is just a map of your tribes and where they were, where they had to go to. That's your Andrew Jackson. And then we'll talk more about Andrew Jackson tomorrow and some more things that happened during his presidency and all that kind of stuff. But the main takeaway from today, Indian Removal Act, Andrew Jackson, Trail of Tears, Indians had to relocate, move, all that good stuff. It is our bathroom break time, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take all of our stuff to the bathroom, so we'll walk out of here. We're going to walk all the way around like we normally would and go to the bathroom. So,
Before we go back to our old class.
let's go. Yeah, we'll go back to the room after we get back. Next time, drop my stuff off. Said drop my stuff off.
Oh my God, it's cold in this
Oh
room.
my God.
He didn't want to give you that. He did not want to give you that.
Look, too cold in here. Just move right, for real.
It's not weather.
Make a good point. Start going for him. Make a good point.
We'll sleep till they come back.
Anthony.
Sleep till they come back.
Okay.
I'll make that bargain. We have, something better.
Better enough.
That's all we got so far. Side told me he'd have something today. Will you kind of poke him on that instead of this? Huh? That helps. Oh, that's just side? That's all. Better than that. Very true. And I told him we would pick up from here and just do that. So we'll work on. Take that rest. I hear you. Sometimes you just need 2 minutes. Hi, Mr. Taylor, whenever they're ready.
Yes, and Nan definitely remembers that one. So you can have some lunch conversation.
Okay. Oh, man. I mean, that's fine.
So the front of your table group has 4 of 2 different pages. Pass out to your quad. 2 different pages, one stapled, one not. Pass out to your quad. Come on in. The quad has some papers on it. Be sure to pass out to everybody. Pencils, ready for writing, ready to learn. Let's go. Alright, each quad has some papers on it. Please pass out to everybody in your quad. It's 2 different papers. It's fill in the blank notes for the age of Jackson. It's a biography card page of Andrew Jackson. I kind of think of this as like a baseball card, right? And you just turned it in for the first 5 presidents. It's like you're writing the stats on a baseball card of the president. So yeah, Lyric, let me borrow yours. Yeah, we do the fill in the blank notes, and I know that you're like, I gotta look at 2 things. Focus on the fill in the blank, all right? Listen, and from the fill in the blank, you can fill out the baseball card, if you will, okay? So if you think of it as a baseball card, I think that might be helpful. It's the statistics about this man's life, and we're gonna keep doing that for most of our presidents overall. So first of all, I want to acknowledge and say, Lexi, I'm so sorry. I missed Lexi's response on our Google Classroom question from Sunday night, so I got a prize for Lexi, just like with Allison. Same thing, if you'll pay attention to when I post on Google Classroom, might be prizes available to you, and that is something that I always try to pay attention. When you give a response, I try to acknowledge it as well. So Lexi, thanks for playing along on Sunday night. Anthony, it's time to have your head up. All right, we're in the age of Jackson. We've come through 5 presidents. Andrew Jackson is going to be the 7th. You say, why are you skipping the 6th? We'll briefly mention him. But Andrew Jackson is unique in that he gets a whole age named after him. He's the only man in U.S. history that really has an era defined by what he did individually. We've got the era of the founders. We've got the era of World War II. But the age of Jackson, it's like this one man really dominated the era. And that's who we're going to be talking about today. Fellas, we good? We good? Ready to lean in and pay attention? Andrew Jackson, you here for it? Because I'm here for it. I need you to be here for it. All right, here we go. We did our Trail of Tears simulation. How'd that make you feel? Like, hindsight, you've gone to the bathroom now, maybe you're processing it in your brain. How did you feel when I busted in and said, pick it up, let's go?
I was not scared.
Confused is a great response.
I knew what was going on.
You knew what was going on. Maybe you saw a first block, guys, word getting around to school. I know how I felt when I walked into that 74-degree room, and I was like, "Ooh, I don't want this to be my new home." So you have that as a formative experience. We've kind of already talked about Andrew Jackson and the Indians, but now let's go backwards and talk about how he got to that point as the president in the first place. So here's Andrew Jackson. First big thing we're going to talk about his life a little bit and then his accomplishments. First thing, and this is where your notes pick up, so pay attention to your fill-in-blank notes. He's a Revolutionary War veteran. Now, barely, he was 13 years old. Okay, so that's not really soldier age, but of course, when you're fighting an independence movement in the 1700s, it's not like they're checking your driver's license. He was a Revolutionary War veteran because he was a courier for George Washington's Continental Army. He would carry messages, and sometimes a young boy can carry messages, not necessarily in uniform, because the British weren't looking at children as soldiers necessarily. So he is a courier. He does get caught on one of his missions, and he gets put into a prisoner of war camp. Age 13, right? All y'all are older than that. Mason, my daughter is 13. Age 13 in a prisoner of war camp. How would you have done in a prisoner of war camp at age 13? Right? So a difficult childhood, to say the least. While he was in prison, while he was in his camp, and he had the duties of attending to a British officer. And this British officer one day told him, "Hey boy, get my boots and shine them." And bold, brash, 13-year-old Andrew Jackson said, "Tell the British, no, not today." He told the guy, "No, I'm not shining your boots." Well, the officer takes his sword to slash at the young man. Jackson puts his arm up to defend himself, and much like this portrait, he gets slashed on the arm because he stood up to this British officer. And he carried a scar on his arm for the rest of his life, right? He had that scar from this incident for the rest of his life. goes to show you how bold he was. He was willing to stand up to a British officer like that at the threat of his life, perhaps. Pretty bold guy, right? Pretty brave guy. That's going to set the tone for the rest of his life, the rest of his career. In the prisoner of war camp, there's an outbreak of smallpox, and he got smallpox. You guys remember talking about smallpox earlier? We talked about how it's a really bad disease. Hey, I got my short sleeve shirt on today. I didn't really do this on purpose, but it works. I told you guys I got a smallpox vaccine growing up in the Army. It is fading across time, which just means I'm getting old, but this is my Smallpox Scar, where I got inoculated with one live virus of smallpox. What they do is they poke at the site and they make one small pock, singular, small pock. It gets very, very, very large. It's itchy, it burns, it's red. You know, you're not supposed to scratch at it, so it gets very large, and then it goes down, and when the scab falls off, that's when you have been vaccinated effectively against smallpox. So it's kind of cool that we can vaccinate ourselves today, but if this is one small pock, I cannot imagine having that all over your body. Andrew Jackson got smallpox all over his body as a child, but he survives. His mother negotiates his release from this prisoner of war camp. And the British, I don't know the whole exchange, but the British agree to release him. He is released from prison at age 14, but before he's out of prison, his mother died. His father died before he was born. He is a 14-year-old orphan. This kind of sets the stage for who he is, right? Even just those first 14 years of his life really established the kind of bold, brash, tough guy that he is going to be. And from that, earns him the nickname Old Hickory. Somebody tell me, what is hickory?
A tough wood.
A tough wood. Okay, so to be called Old Hickory is to say how tough he is. I'll tell you one more story. This comes from after his soldier days, but before his president days. Okay, he was involved in a duel. He's actually involved in a lot of duels in his life. Anybody know what a duel is? Yeah, when two people, this is weird for us, it's not how we do it today, I hope, but when two people have a gripe with each other in the early 1800s, they could challenge each other to a duel, and that could result in them standing 10 paces away from each other, aiming guns at each other, and shooting at each other. Now, a lot of duels didn't get that far. A lot of times it was just like, oh, I challenge you to a duel, argue, and they settle it before they actually go to the guns. But sometimes a duel does progress all the way towards shooting at each other. And Andrew Jackson was involved in many duels. It's kind of fuzzy as to how many because of record keeping and all that, but between 5 and maybe even more than 100. Okay, so that's a broad range. But this guy was known to have a temper. He was known to be involved in duels. In 1806, he's involved in a duel with a man who slighted him on a horse racing bet. Can you imagine making a bet with your bud over like the weekend football game? And the bet gets a little out of hand, and then all of a sudden you're shooting at each other? That's kind of what happened here, right? They were arguing over a horse racing bet. Well, rarely is it just the one thing. It turned into this man insulting his wife, and now all of a sudden Andrew Jackson has to stand up for himself. He can't stand for his wife being insulted. So these two men take to the dueling field, and here's how a duel works. You kind of flip a coin to determine who shoots first. His opponent was able to shoot first. He aims at Andrew Jackson, he shoots, he hits him in the chest. Andrew Jackson, with a sucking chest wound, a bullet near his heart, cocks his pistol, aims at his opponent, and shoots him dead. With a bullet in his heart, near his heart, he shoots his opponent dead. Now, Andrew Jackson's going to carry that bullet for the rest of his life. He's going to have chest pains for the rest of his life from this duel. So some might say, he killed a man. He definitely killed a man. Some might say he's a murderer. What do you think? Is he a murderer?
No.
The laws on dueling at this time are very fuzzy. Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel as well, another famous person to die in a duel. If a politician today had killed a person in his previous life, right, 10 or 15 years previous, would that person even get elected to an office today? No. Oh, wait, probably not. Probably is kind of a big word. We would probably hold that against someone who's trying to run for office. Back in this day, it just added to his legacy. It just made him even tougher. So, yeah, he killed a man, and he still becomes president. So, not something that would probably happen today, but back in this day, they just kind of added to his legacy. He was a general during the War of 1812, and most notably, he fought at what? Battle of New Orleans. We got to make that connection. Okay, Andrew Jackson, Battle of New Orleans. It is on the president's wall, so if you ever need a review, it's right there. He gains fame at the Battle of New Orleans. The battle did not need to be fought, but it was fought, and the person who gained the most out of it was Andrew Jackson. He gets famous. When you're famous, you can do things because your name is recognized throughout the countryside. What he chooses to do, of course, is leverage that into politics. So the Battle of New Orleans kind of changed his life forever, made him famous, made him have the ability to run for public office. That's not the end of his military career, though. He does go on to fight some more. He actually fights in a series of Indian wars. And I do think that's ironic. He's kind of been fighting against the Indians as a military man, and then he still fights against the Indians as the president. So he really just never had a good thing going when it was related to the Native Americans. He fights at he has one major victory against the Indians at a battle in an area known as Horseshoe Bend, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. And I'm going to highlight this because it's close to us. It's in Alabama. You could visit Horseshoe Bend today if you wanted to. Okay, it is a preserved site. And I got the chance to do this when I was at Fort Benning, which is in Columbus, Georgia. So it's a relatively short drive from the western side of Georgia into Alabama. And here is what Horseshoe Bend looks like. Why do you think it is called Horseshoe Bend? That's right, because the water, the geography, the river here actually looks like a horseshoe bend. And the battle here, I'm not going to get too much into the military, I'll just explain it to you briefly. The Indians had an encampment right here. They protected themselves by building a fence line right here. They thought as long as we protect this fence line, anyone coming towards us, they're going to have to, if they don't make it across the fence line, we're good. Here's a picture of what the fence line looks like. I mean, it was really built up. Well, Andrew Jackson, he's fighting this war against the Creek Indians. He said he sends his men right up the middle, right over the fence line. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to be the first one. I don't think the first guy had much of a chance. But because they overwhelmed the fence line here, they were able to break through the fence and then storm all the way into the Indian camp. Some of the Indians were able to escape on the water. They had some canoes lined up right there, but a lot of them got slaughtered right there at the Horseshoe Bend. So this is one of his notable victories. Again, it's kind of sad that he's persecuting the Native Americans. It's kind of a sad time in American history where the natives were being very oppressed, but it adds to his reputation all the more. So that leads us to the point of the election of 1824, where we have Andrew Jackson pitted against John Quincy Adams. Election of 1824, Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams. This is when James Monroe is stepping down, when he is done with his 2 terms. So what we have here is 2 fresh faces, 2 men that are new to the nation in terms of running for president. And we said that James Monroe, he was the last what? Remind me.
He was the last one.
Last of the founding father generation. Exactly. So the country's kind of looking for a new person for a new generation. The choice could not possibly be more different. I told you about Andrew Jackson, and now let's talk about John Quincy Adams a little bit here. So John Quincy Adams, by his name, what type of a background do you think he has? Who's he related to for starters? That's right. He is the son of President John Adams. John Adams was Mr. Richie Rich, okay, Mr. Federalist who came from wealthy elite status, and his son is pretty much the same. He got strong support in the New England states, so that is several states. It's significant. It's not just like his home state, but it's several states. And he was Richie Rich Jr. He followed his father's footsteps. Now, he's not a Federalist because the Federalist Party had kind of faded away by this time, but he still represents that elite class, those who make money in business, those who are in favor of the American system and all the programs that come with it. He is Richie Rich Part 2. So in some ways, he's not all that different from the founding fathers that are fading away. He's a son of the same background. So this is one side, Mr. Richie Rich, versus Mr. Hardscrabble Old Hickory. We got a big difference between our 2 candidates, and the country is going to decide who they want to be their president. Election of 1824 kind of goes down like this. So don't worry, don't look at that map just yet. The Federalist Party, it is dissolved. It is no more. What we have is 4 members of the Democratic Republicans running against each other. it's hard to have a one-party race because these guys, they try to distinguish themselves while still saying we're Democratic Republicans. It was very hard for people to understand who stood for what. And when you have 4 people in the race, it's very hard for anyone to get 51% of the vote, right? We always say majority rules. If I took a poll in this classroom, who wants to have pizza or who wants to have ice cream, how would I determine the winner? If there's 50% of the vote, 51% of the vote going to one side, well, that's the winner. That's the clear winner. What we can see here is that there's not a clear winner. When you look at the percentages of the votes, you have 43%, 31%, 13, and 13. No clear victor. So that's a problem because now the House of Representatives is going to determine who the president is in a way that takes it out of the hands of the people. We like to believe that we are a country that gets to elect our own president, but because of the tie, it's not a dead tie, but it's not a majority thing here. It goes to the House of Representatives, and in this, John Adams is named the next president. Andrew Jackson doesn't like that because of this is what happens. Henry Clay makes a deal. Remember that name? We're hearing that name again. Henry Clay makes a deal that's going to make John Quincy Adams the next president, JQA. Henry Clay gives support for John Quincy Adams in exchange for John Quincy Adams saying, you could be my next Secretary of State. It's kind of like if you do this, I'll give you that. So Andrew Jackson doesn't like that one bit. He calls it a corrupt bargain. And it was. We don't have this happen in politics today. We haven't had the election have to be decided by House of Representatives ever since this time. But do you think that Congress people make these kind of deals today still? I think they do. Okay, I'm not going to dive into any evidence or anything like that. But there's a whole lot of, hey, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's exactly what happens here. Henry Clay makes a deal that makes John Quincy Adams president, gets him enough votes. In exchange, John Quincy Adams names Henry Clay his Secretary of State. And it kind of looks like this. Hey, thanks for helping me win the election. And he's handing him the position of Secretary of State. So a corrupt bargain, a bad deal, shady, not what you want your government to be doing, kind of dealing in the dark, just a bad deal all around. Jackson calls it a corrupt bargain. And because of this, Andrew Jackson becomes seen as a man of the people. Right? One more time, we got some Richie Rich as the president. We got the elites in office again. But a lot of people see Andrew Jackson as their guy. He's one of me. He's a farmer. He's an orphan. He's a military guy. He did not come from money. He made himself into what he is. Andrew Jackson is a man of the people. And Andrew Jackson is going to spend the next 4 years seeking to remove property qualifications for voting. Some of these data points are in your notes. Some of them aren't. I think I see a good job. You guys are doing a good job of following along. We're going to talk about property qualifications, what exactly that means just in a second. But Andrew Jackson, he's not going to sit back and just take his L. Athletes, you get beat. What do you want to do next? You're going to work hard in that next week. Footballers, you're going to rise to the occasion on the next Friday night. That's what Andrew Jackson does here. He doesn't sit back and just take his loss. He's going to work hard, and he's going to try to rally again in the next election. So that brings us to the election of 1828. We see the same cast of characters. It's the exact same 2 guys running for office. This time, JQA, he's the sitting president, and Andrew Jackson is still his opponent one more time. Well, let's talk about those property qualifications. Andrew Jackson spent the next 4 years working to get all free white men the privilege of voting. Suffrage. Do you remember that word? What does suffrage mean? The right to vote. Andrew Jackson works for universal suffrage. Universal means all. Suffrage, the right to vote. The problem with that is it's not really the right to vote for everybody. It's the right to vote for who? Free white men. So some history books call it universal suffrage. I put in these 2 key words because it is important. It's only white men and it's only men. It's only white people and it's only men. Women, not there yet. People of color, not there yet. We're walking our story towards those rights, okay? But it is a step in the right direction. The reason Andrew Jackson wanted to work for this is because previously you had to own property to be a voter. We like to say that, hey, in America, everybody gets to vote. Our founding fathers and all of our documents, all men created equal, everybody gets to vote. At the time, you actually had to own property. You had to be a white male who owned property to get to vote. How representative of that is the country? Not very. Who's that leaving out? What type of person, other than women, we know women don't have a vote yet, what type of person does that leave out, the property qualification part of it? Poor people. Okay, those who don't have as much money, those who aren't landowners, they don't get to vote. They literally don't have their voice heard because they don't get to vote. Well, Andrew Jackson works to get states to allow people who do not have a property to be voters. And it's going to have a dramatic impact on this next election. It makes the country more democratic. Okay, it makes the country into what it always should have been, and it allows simpler men like Jackson the opportunity to vote. People who don't own land, people who are maybe orphans themselves, people who are going to have a hard time, down and out, lost my money, whatever. It allows common people to now be voters as well. And a lot of times it is called the birth of modern politics. Now you don't have to be rich, you don't have to be born rich, you don't have to be from the right family. Anyone can become president of the United States, arguably thanks to Andrew Jackson and what he did during this election. So look at this. This is a lot of comparison. Don't look at the colors right now, okay? Look where I'm pointing. 1824, how many people voted?
356,038.
Anthony, crushing it. This is how many people cast a ballot in 1824? 356,000. 1828, how many people voted?
1,155,000.
1.1 million. 356,000, 1.1 million. That is times 3.
And 58,000.
Because, hey, every vote matters. Every person voting matters. Times 3 as many people vote. 3 times as many people get to vote. A lot of those people are what kind of people? Common men, right? A lot of people are those who don't own property. They probably think, hey, Andrew Jackson, thanks for getting me the right to vote. They vote for Andrew Jackson. So this time it is an overwhelming victory for Andrew Jackson, thanks to universal white male suffrage. So that's a big idea that comes out of this election of 1828. Now, you'll notice here, remember, there were no parties and there were 4 people running. Well, in 1828, we got the return of parties. You got John Quincy Adams. He runs as what's called a national Republican. That is not exactly the same as today's Republican Party. But you got Andrew Jackson running as what is known as a Jacksonian Democrat. And that actually is the birth of today's Democrat Party. So Democrats today, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, all the Democrats today can trace their heritage back to Andrew Jackson being known as a Democrat. That's not to say every single issue has been the same across 200 years, but generally speaking, today's Democrats trace their heritage back to Jackson's Democrats in 1828. Today's Democrat Party, I'm going to quiz you on what you know already, has a logo. What is the logo of today's Democrat Party? You guys know? There's 2. I heard it. A donkey. Today, the Republicans have an elephant, and the Democrats are marked by a donkey, right? That's their logo. Here's what it looks like. This is today's Democrat Party, and here's the reason why. It's because one of Jackson's opponents, one of his critics, called him a jackass. Jackson, jackass. He said, that Jackson is just a jackass. And Jackson, instead of taking it as an insult, he turned it into a motivator, and he said, that's right, I'll be your jackass, and this is our logo. And to this day, Andrew Jackson, the jackass, has a donkey as the logo for the Democratic Party. I'm telling you, you ain't gonna forget that one, right? Ask the Taylor twins. Anybody know the Taylor twins, 11th graders? I'm not sure how much they remember from my U.S. history class, but those jokers still come up to me and say, hey, Mr. Swanson, I remember that Andrew Jackson was a jackass. So, and by the way, when I say that, I'm saying the name of the animal, nothing else. So literally, Andrew Jackson is a jackass. He takes the insult, he turns it into a motivator, and this is the logo of the Democrat Party to this day. All right, enough about that. It's a King James jackass. It's literally in the Bible. That word is used in the Bible. So, moving on. Andrew Jackson becomes the 7th president of the United States. Now, look at my president wall. You may notice I skipped number 6 because we didn't talk about him all that much. We move on to Andrew Jackson, 7th president of the United States. Big characteristic of him is he strengthens the presidency. Every president to this date has had to find his own way as the chief executive. George Washington, first guy to do it. With, everything he did was a president. But Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, we good? We got some words going on? Looking for the right notes? All right. Every man has had to decide how to navigate the presidency. Thomas Jefferson, he believed that the presidency should be kind of weak, right? Not have a lot of powers, but what did Thomas Jefferson do? Fought Louisiana, so he strengthened the presidency in his own way. Andrew Jackson, he's going to spend his time as chief executive strengthening the presidency, and he's going to, we kind of saw it with the Indian Removal Act, right? That's one thing that he flexed his power on as president, and he's going to take on many opponents. He's a fighter. Okay, the rest of our class, we're going to hang out with Andrew Jackson through tomorrow as well. We're going to call it Jackson versus, and I want you to imagine like a boxing match, right? Jackson versus who else or what else. And we're going to see Jackson take on many opponents. So this is going to be the characteristics of his presidency overall. Now, Andrew Jackson, he was a partier. Who likes to go to a party, right? I don't know what high school parties even look like these days. You guys are partiers? I bet you didn't party like Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, common man, when he was elected, he invited everyone to the White House. He said, hey, it's the people's house, right? Y'all come on in. Let's celebrate. They had big old bowls of punch, probably had alcohol in it. They had a lot of food. They had a 1,000-pound wheel of cheese. And people, commoners, were just mingling throughout the White House. Everybody's eating and drinking together. It was before the days of security. It was before the days of the Secret Service. I know it's hard for us to imagine because you would not walk up to the White House and just walk right in today. But at this time, Andrew Jackson said, hey, common people, just like me, all right, let's have a party. This wheel of cheese, people just walked up to it and sliced off cheese and ate it, whatever. It is said that the White House smelled like cheese for months afterwards, right? It smelled so bad and it got into the carpet and it just like made the whole room smell. White House smelled like cheese for months afterwards. So ain't nobody party like Andrew Jackson parties when he became president. One more little story about inside of his presidency. This is just to kind of illustrate how tough he was. What was his nickname? Remember? Old Hickory, toughest Hickory. Well, someone didn't like Andrew Jackson, and this man wanted to assassinate him. This guy, which you see right here holding the gun, this guy thought that he campaigned for Andrew Jackson. And he thought that since he campaigned for Andrew Jackson, he deserved a job under Andrew Jackson's administration. Well, whatever the reasons are, Andrew Jackson did not appoint him to a job. So reasonable, he thought that he would kill the president, right? I didn't get a job, I guess I got to kill the man. Well, this guy, he was a little mentally deranged. He approaches Andrew Jackson in the open. Again, it was before the days before security and Secret Service and all that. He pulls out one gun, points